Hi, this is Phil Cooke, and welcome to the Phil Cooke Podcast. Today, we're going to take a little turn, and we often do so many episodes on media, but today we're going to talk about print. Print is a medium that we rarely talk about on this episode, and people rarely talk about it in the culture today. So many people think print is dead, but nothing could be further from the truth. And we're going to be talking about the Kinsmen Journal. It's the brainchild of Peter Ostapko, who has created this amazing journal based on men's issues, manhood, fatherhood, how men should be engaging the culture today, the identity of men. It covers the waterfront when it comes to men's issues, but it does it in such a way that's really quite engaging, really enthralling. When I got it, when he sent it to me in the mail, I was just amazed at what a amazing piece it is. I mean, it's a coffee table book. It's going to go in your library. It's not, forget magazine. It's a high quality journal. It could be an art piece. But we're going to talk today about a number of things. Why this matters, why print is still alive. But we're also going to talk about his career. He's a banker. And he hasn't left the banking industry. He did this completely on the side while juggling a family. And if you've ever been in that situation where you feel called to do something significant with your life, maybe you like your job, maybe you don't like your job, and you're not sure if you should quit, if you should juggle both, I'll tell you, there's going to be some answers for you. He's going to have some great advice today. So this could be one of the best episodes you've ever seen. And I want to encourage you, stay tuned. It's going to be fantastic. Peter, welcome to the program. I'm really excited about having you as a guest on the podcast because you're a little different than the normal media professionals that we usually get on here. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you very much. No, it's a privilege and an honor to have me on here. I'm so grateful. So thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate that. Jessica
Lally sent me your journal, the Kinsmen Journal, and I have to say, I was blown away by it. I'm a print guy. I love print. I've written 10 books. And I also, it's a funny thing, I'm a magazine guy. I'm a hardcore magazine guy. So, and when it comes to journals, I was on the board of Image Journal for a number of years, the journal of, art and Christian art and music. And so I love the whole journal, magazine, print thing. And everybody says print is gone. Yeah. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, kindly, I would say that's just not true. But there's some truth. It's a half-true statement. I would say poor print media is gone because digital and online technology has replaced that, and because it's more efficient, it's more timely, and it's a better platform. But for deep thinking, for, of course, long-form journalism, and for those who want a different type of experience reading, then print journalism and magazines certainly have a place, and they've not only have a place, but they've seen quite a resurgence in recent years, and we've seen that even with e-readers. E-readers have plateaued and they've fallen. If you walk into a Barnes and Noble, I have one here in town. They used to have about 20% of the store. It was completely redesigned for the Nook, and now it's not even 2%. And so I just find that really fascinating. So I think there's a place for both. But I do think that, just printing news for the sake of printing news on paper and shipping it out, and ultimately it turns into pulp, there's really no place for that. But something that has meaning and is much more deep in its thought, paper is a perfect place for that. It's very timeless, and people like that. So
I could not agree more. And let's get down to specifics. We're talking here about the Kinsmen Journal. I got a copy right here. It's really amazing. This is super quality, by the way. The design, the way it's put together, and it's really focused on men. Tell me a little bit about where the idea came from, what your focus is. Share a little bit.
Yeah, well, I used a little bit of example about Barnes & Noble. I'm in the business world. I'm in banking, finance. I've been in the space for more than a decade. But I've always been drawn to print. I've always had an intrigue to it. I write a little bit about it in the journal. But growing up, my dad and my mom, even after they separated, they were a part of, different print publications locally here in the community, kind of community magazines at the time. You'd print menus and map directions, and all those things have become antiquated. But I just grew up around it. So I've always had just an intrigue and a curiosity for things, the printed word. And as a little boy, you just long to do the things that your dad does. And so when he was around, I was curious about it. But from a business standpoint, you look at the market and you say, okay, there's something I'm looking for and it's not there. So what do entrepreneurs do? They say, well, I'm going to go create it, because I believe if there's people like me that want to see something like this and it's not there, then maybe there's a need for it. And so if you were to go to Barnes and Noble today, you'd find, probably 1,000 different magazines and publications available. If you go to the women's section, there's hundreds, and there's just some amazing publications, very edifying, very encouraging, very inspiring, a lot of really great content for women out there. If you go to the men's section, it's not the case.
That's right.
There's really just a couple of different topics, and most of them are very, they're very materialistic and worldly to a sense. And so I just said, I want to create a publication that speaks to a man in a very redemptive, encouraging, inspiring way that's not watered down or cheesy, but it's also real and honest, and very, very beautiful in its presentation. And so that was really kind of what we aimed for. So long story short, nobody was doing it. So I said, I'm going to go do it.
I love that. If you listen to nothing else on this podcast, that's the line to listen to. If nobody else is doing it, maybe it's your opportunity to get out there and open up a new door.
Right.
But you're right about Barnes and Noble. Most of the men's magazines are centered around girls, cars, or hunting. And there's not a lot of really enriching, in-depth stuff. And so I think what you've stumbled onto also, let me just say from my perspective, over the years, I've been involved with different men's ministry type outreaches and movements, if you will. And they go from being fairly cheesy and kind of over the top to being really boring, to be perfectly honest. Or they go another route, which is, okay, let's all go camping and chop wood. There's just not an intellectual, classy, kind of stylish, if I may, approach to men's ministry. And I think you've just taken it here, because as I look through, Stephen Mansfield is a friend of mine, a great writer. He's contributed. You've got some really top quality writers and designers involved in this thing. And I just have the most admiration for it, because I think you've just done a brilliant job with it right out of the blocks. And then I've got issue number 1. How often does this come out, by the way?
Yeah. So we just published that this spring, volume 1. As you can imagine, it takes time to create the content that we're doing, and this is all bootstrapped together. So we're kind of landing on right now, probably about an 18-month cycle. So about every 18 months, a new volume will come out. That could be shortened to every 12 months or so. There's some things on the horizon that could affect that. We'll see. But for 240 pages, there's 30 different articles in there, short essays, mid-range, and long form essay, editorial. There's a lot in there. And so we were very, just prayerful about what we were going to put in there, about the voice in which we wanted to speak with, aligning the different voices from the different writers. But like you said, we got some great writers for this first one. We're hoping for quite a few more in the next one. But we just, I guess for me, being in the business world, I thought to myself, okay, in the business space, like I see there's Inc. magazine, there's Fast Company, there's Fortune. They're all talking about the same 9 tech moguls. And I'm like, okay, there's just a lot more out there in the world.
Yeah.
And I thought about, as a person of faith and belief, I'm like, okay, well, there's just in my community, I know of, so-and-so who runs the auto shop and so-and-so who runs this company. They're great men of God. What if we just talk about them? So there's a relatability factor that we really tried to emphasize. But then we also try to pull in like the Stephen Mansfields and Tim Elmores and people who have they are thought leaders and just great voices in their respective spaces. And
Tim's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Outstanding guy.
And it's interesting. This is something that goes on your bookshelf. or on your coffee table. It's something that will be around for a long time. This is not the kind of magazine, I subscribe to a ton of magazines because I said I'm a magazine guy. And I'll just bundle them up on a plane. I travel way too much, and I'll bundle them up in my backpack or my briefcase and take them on a plane and burn through them. I've got Advertising Age and Fast Company and Christianity Today and a whole wide variety of them. And I usually just leave them along the way. But this is something that I wouldn't leave. I'm not about to leave anywhere, because this is something I refer to a lot. This is really a coffee table, a paperback version of a coffee table book. It's really quite brilliant.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you, one of the improvements we'd like to make, and possibly on a reprint of volume 1, is doing case bound where it's hard.
Oh, great
Because
idea.
a lot of people ask, they're like, is it a book or is it a magazine? I'm like, well, it's kind of both, because
That's
the
right.
content and the quality of it is very timeless. So like you just said, you don't really want to throw it away because you can tell it's just got some girth to it physically.
Yeah.
But
Well,
then,
that's true.
yeah, but then, just it wears eventually. And so I think, what if we were to do a hard case bound? And I think like kind of building almost like an encyclopedia, on a shelf is kind of our intent and hope with some of the design in the future. But yeah, so, but
Good.
it's a magazine in a sense that it's alive and it's changing. Whereas it's, a book is a topic, you deep dive into a singular topic. Whereas this, it's kind of pulling from a variety of different perspectives and thoughts,
Yeah.
and then curating them and putting them together. I think that's kind of the name of the game now in this information age, is how do you qualify and how do you put together information that's that's readily available for people in a certain niche or subject. And that's what we
Yeah.
tried to do with this journal.
So I want to know a little bit about what you've learned. I live in LA. I'm in Los Angeles, working Hollywood in that environment. And, when you watch most television programs these days, the dad is the idiot. Usually the husband, the man is the moron. He's the guy that they make fun of. And I get comedy. I'm all about that. However, I do think we've had so much of that over the last 20, 30 years that we've just grown up in a culture where men don't know how to be men anymore. And I think they're so denigrated. And, we talk about the patriarchy all the time, all the folks out there trying to put down men in various different ways.
Sure.
And yet there's a side that we need to build up. And, I think there's look at most kids today that grow up in, broken families. The presence of a father can make a dramatic difference. There's so much research out there, so much information out there on the difference a good man can make. Why did you pick that focus? Why men? You could have done a journal on any number of things. Why men?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'm a man, so I'm not a woman, so I don't have really the context to speak. So people are like, "Are you going to do one for women?" I'm like, "No," because I'm just not that smart, and women, I couldn't do that.
Smart move, good move.
Yeah, but I think that's the very thing is I see what the narrative is from a cultural standpoint for men, and I'm like, I just disagree. I know a lot of really great men. I know there are good men who want to be great fathers, who want to be engaged and active in their church and in their faith, and they lead companies or they work for companies, and they do holy work each and every day. And so I wanted to speak in a very positive and uplifting light for men. And so that was something that was just really near and dear to me. I mean, the subject of fatherhood is a very, very important subject to me, as it is with many men in my generation. There's also data out there about fatherlessness and broken homes and divorce and various different details. And there's hundreds of authors have written about the effects of that culturally and societally. But for me personally, it was a burden. I come from a broken home. And so, there's a whole lot of different stories with that. But for me personally, it was just something that was burdened very deeply within me. And so being a person of faith, that had to be a major component, because I didn't want this just to be this isn't about me. This is about, me collectively bringing together what God has orchestrated and presenting it in a way to glorify him and to bring about his kingdom here on earth. And I just personally believe with men specifically, when men love and lead well, when they are, surrendered to a holy, sovereign, good God, that bodes well for all of society. It bodes well for the church. It bodes well for community, for school, for education, for single moms, for single dad. It's just, you can't go wrong when you serve the Lord. So I was just like, how can I encourage and strengthen men in a way, like you said, that is not a 25,000 conference attendee or a retreat into the woods where we're running with backpacks, because not everybody's going to do either of those extremes. I'm like, how can I speak to the businessman, to the busy man? And I tell you, Phil, like that's been the most reaffirming part, is we were so careful about what we put in here and what we were saying. And we were just really in tune with the Holy Spirit about that. Not perfect on it, but we really aimed for excellence. And it took time to curate this and put it together. But we've received so much feedback and letters and thoughts and emails from people who have said, you are speaking to the exact thing that the Lord is talking to me about as a man. You put a language around what I've been thinking about for the last 5 years as a dad. Like, I mean, I set out to reach, this, you look for a target market, So we said, okay, here's our target market, 35 to 55, basically most men that still have kids or children or teenagers in the household. Well, I'm getting messages from 75-year-old men and from sophomores in high school saying, I'm reading this with my dad, or people are like, I'm reading this every Saturday as a part of my, Sabbath. And so we've kind of just thrown out the target market and say, it's just for men. It's for men. It's for boys who want to be good men, because we want to just inspire and encourage, because, when we have good men, society benefits from that.
That's a great point. And, I'm just sitting here thinking it's not popular to say so in public, but, a good man, a good father would solve so many problems in our culture today.
Oh, goodness.
I was talking to someone the other day about how most of the issues, the controversial issues in our culture today are sexual, they're family, they're, gender related. I mean, all of those issues relate around finding a great man or a great father who can step in and make a big difference. And that's not to say, that's not to criticize women in any way whatsoever. We need great women too. But so often the element that's missing in broken families today is the dad, is the husband. And, since no fault divorce came about years ago, divorce is easier than ever. It's just simply so easy to walk away. And I think raising up a generation of responsible, serious men, I don't know, there's not a lot of things you could do that's more important than that. I mean, you criticize me if you want, but I just think that a generation of really great men and fathers would make such a dramatic difference in the culture today.
Yeah. So really, you're 100% right. And I guess what we're trying to do with this, what we believe the Lord is just leading us to, is just to be a voice in this space. We're not trying to tackle polarizing issues, because there's no value in that.
Right.
But like I said, if we aim to speak to edifying and building up a young man into who he is, and that's been something too that was really neat in the editing process. You'd appreciate this is, editing is a lot of work. I mean, and I'm not an editor. I'm in banking, and so we have a gentleman who's a great writer and a pastor, and he helped, he carried a lot of the load on the editing process, but I was involved too. But it was neat how just this common thread started to emerge over and over. And it was, it was a few different verses that would show up over and over in Romans 8 about identity, co-heir with Christ. And we just saw this just thread emerge throughout the journal as we were going through it. And it's just the subject of identity. If we don't know who we are, then we're going to be, very, very, destructive in whatever space, whether it's, in our finance, or whether in our work, or whether that's in our relationships. But if we know who we are, like if we know that God loves us, that we are his beloved, that he calls us his own, that he has adopted us as sons, it sounds so simple, but yet it's extraordinarily deep and theological about how God sees us as men. And why that's such a disconnect for so many men is because they've not been told that.
True.
Because their father didn't tell them that, or they didn't hear it very much. And it's because their father didn't hear it and their father didn't, know it. And so this is by no means a knock on previous generations. This is about really an understanding about who we are and articulating that with our kids and with our spouse and with our friends, saying, no, like that thought process is not okay, because this is who God says that you are. And we need to be reaffirmed in that. And so
that's powerful.
That's what we're aiming to do, is to speak to that. But one book that I read that has been very, very powerful in this, or just some of the thought process, is the subject of the boy crisis with men, because boys become men. And there's a lot of data on there in his book, Warren Farrell, and he talks about it. And it is a fascinating, fascinating book. Of course, there's the rise of Jordan Peterson. A lot of young men are really drawn to what he has to say. John Tyson in the Faith Space, Jeff Bethke, Brian Tome. There's a lot of people who are really speaking in on this subject of fatherhood and men, which is really great, because there is a desire amongst young men to be good fathers, and they're just looking for ways and tools and resources to do that. So I've said this before in other conversations, I am very bullish, to use a marketing term. I'm very bullish on the state of men going forward, because I've had a lot of conversations with men in the last few years, and they all want to be good dads. They all want to do the right thing. And so I'm excited about that. And so we're fighting against the mainstream narrative that says otherwise, because I believe in the good of men in this generation. I do.
That's true. And you had a great point. Young boys in particular need that role model. I was thinking, we didn't have a son. We had 2 daughters. I would have liked a son, but the risk of 3 daughters was too great. So we quit. Just to be safe. But they turned out great.
Oh, yeah.
They turned out great. Who would have expected us to raise good kids? I'm shocked. But we've got a grandson who's 6 years old now, Clyde. Yeah. And I was looking back at my daughters, Kelsey and Bailey, and when they were in elementary school, they had a man teacher. Yeah. And that was so great for them to see a man in that role that early in their life as a model. Yeah. And I just hope Clyde, he's just now in kindergarten. He's actually 5. I said 6. He's 5. He's starting kindergarten. And for him, I'm talking to my daughter, Kelsey, about let's get him in a man's class. And it would be just great to see that influence early on. So I just think it would be a fantastic thing. So I just think what you're doing is fantastic. Let's shift gears for a minute.
Well, hold on. Before you get there, I want to say one thing real quick.
Oh, please go.
As a grandfather, Phil, you have an extraordinary opportunity to pour into his life.
True.
And I just want to reaffirm that to you. There is a spot in a young boy's heart that is only filled for a grandfather. And you have a remarkable ability to speak into his life because of who you are. And so I encourage you in that because there is so much. Even just yesterday, my stepdad came over and we haven't seen him a lot this year. He's been sick and he's had some stuff, and the kids just gravitated to him. I mean, they just gravitated to him because he's that male role. And so just the more you can spend with that boy and just pour into his life, you have a special spot. So anyways, I just wanted to say that and encourage you in that. So
that's awesome. I accept that. Thank you very much. I'll get much more serious about that. That's a good word. So let me shift gears a little bit. And a lot of the issues that we talk about this on this podcast are issues about your career, leadership. A lot of people that watch are involved in media, creativity, design, things like that. And one of the things that's interesting about you is you were a banker, and you had this vision for something new. And you had a family, so you're trying to balance all these balls in the air. And a lot of people are in that place. They're thinking, okay, I'm in a job. Maybe they like it, maybe they hate it, but they're thinking, I really have a dream out here that I feel like I'm called to do. Do I quit my job? Do I try to juggle both? Give me some tips. Give me some stories from your own experience. How did you do this?
Well, I'm still living in the margins because I'm still in banking,
Great.
In that space. And so, for me personally, I believe it's given me a lot more credibility in the marketplace because just in my town, there's, probably a couple hundred different commercial bankers, but there's very few bankers/publishers. And so, it's just given me some platform and ability just to kind of speak on that. But I would say this, naturally, if someone has, I think all of us have within us just this innate desire to create because it's God-given. Everybody has a creativity within them, whether they realize it or not. They absolutely do. Some creative endeavors are for full time. They're actually to be something that's going to provide for you and for your family. Some of them are just for hobby and for fun and enjoyment. Not everything is to make money, and that's okay. Like, we need to just enjoy things for the sake of enjoying them. But I would say this: I think for me, I just couldn't shake it anymore. I just had to do it. Like, I just could not. I was just thinking about it over and over, and it just would not go away. And so
that's good.
So there is a deep underlying reason spiritually for me. The Lord just clearly got my attention. I don't know how deep you want me to go with regards to some of the spiritual components, but God was very direct in getting my attention. So much so, I'll tell the abbreviated story. So we have some of the videos on our website that tell some of the story a little bit, but I picked up a book in 2017. It was called The Revenge of Analog. There was a couple of chapters in there that just caught my attention beyond. And one of them, they were on paper and print, and the revenge of these technologies, or the revenge of these industries that were supposed to die that didn't. Brings me back to your point about print being dead, and that whole thing. Anyways, I read it and I just was completely captivated by this book. Well, being a spiritual person, that was also a divine intervention. God saying, okay, I want to bring your curiosity to this. So for the next 2 years, I just researched the industry through and through, learned everything I could about it, about the independent printing space in Europe, learned about why certain magazines were dying off, learned about, how companies are able to print anymore, about bootstrapping, about, all the different things, everything and anything that I could learn, I did. And then in 2019, I was kind of hesitant because some of the things that I wanted to talk about with the journal, I didn't really feel like I had a release on. And I remember having a 2-hour-long conversation with my dad. And him and I have a good relationship. I mean, we talk, a few, 6, 7 times a year. He's not here. He lives in a different part of the country. But him and I had an amazing conversation. And I wrote about this in the journal. And at the end of the conversation, he just came out of nowhere and he said, Peter, I just need to tell you that I'm sorry. And I was like, I'm sorry for what? He goes, I never should have left you and your brothers. And that was a very pivotal moment in this journey because it was a physical release. It was an emotional release. And there's so much more there that I could unpack in a one-on-one conversation. But that happened in June, the end of June, 2019. In July, beginning in the end of July and August, there were 4 weeks in a row where the Lord just spoke very clearly through people. This is what you're going to do. This is what's going to happen. And it was already reaffirming things that I had already been thinking and praying about. So this wasn't out of complete left field. And then just everything started to happen. So for me, it was walking in obedience. It was trusting that God was going to meet me each and every time that I was going to move forward. And he did. And so honestly, it just became almost.
That's great.
So yeah, it was an amazing experience. But I would say this, if anybody's out there, you have to do it because, you don't want any regrets,
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing that I would say is give all of the outcomes and the expectations, just give them and surrender them to the Lord. Like, don't say, okay, I have to leave my job in 3 months because I'm going to do X. Like just
Right.
start and just allow it to take its own shape and form and see what happens.
Well, it's interesting. People I meet, I divide into 2 groups. One is, like you say, that they have a full-time job. They're nervous about quitting. And so they never really step out and follow the dream. I was in that camp. I was in the Midwest, and I've talked about it on the podcast many times, so I'll be brief, but I was in the Midwest. And I just knew God had called me to Hollywood, come to LA. I'm supposed to be there, but we had our kids in good schools. We had a house, we had a good church, we had friends there. And I thought, hey, I could just commute. Maybe I can go back and forth. I did a project for Disney. I did 7 round trips in 2 weeks. And I thought, oh God, this is not a good thing. But I finally got fired from my job. And when I look back, it wasn't my boss that fired me. It was God that fired me. I think he just finally got fed up that I wasn't stepping out and doing it. Now, on the other hand, I see people that they just immediately quit their job. And so suddenly they're stuck. They have no income. They have no foundation, no basis, no networking anymore. And so they end up dying. They don't prosper. They don't do well. They usually fail and end up going back at some other job, often a lesser job. So I think there's real wisdom in what you're talking about. Staying at your job, like you say, you're still doing it. You're still a banker.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't have to immediately shift gears radically, quit your job and follow what God's called you to do. I think there's a real transition process, and that transition could go for years and years and years. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I could not agree more. And, in the culture we find ourselves too, I think more and more employers and companies and people are of the understanding that people don't just work for the same company for 30 years. They have different expressions of who they are. Now there's a fine line, and you have to get your work done. You have to do what you're asked and all those types of things. Of course, you need to honor your employer and your time with that. But I do think there is a place for the entrepreneurial spirit, and it means different things to different people, but you absolutely have to take the chance. You absolutely have to, because you learn so much about yourself, of course, but I think the deeper is, at least for me, I learned more about the faithfulness of God in my life and how he wanted to bring about things within me. And for me, it was, I had been kind of him-hoeing around for a while, and he's like, okay, like I said, he spoke very, very clearly. For you, it was kicked you in the butt. He said, all right, well, I'm going to remove this safety net that you think you have there, and you're going to go do what I want you to go do. And so, it's different for all of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, I tell you, there's so many reasons I love your story. I love the journal. I just think you've done an amazing job. The the pathway you've taken is amazing, and people need to learn from that. But then I also love the analog aspect of it. You're not, I meet so many doing what I do for a living. I meet so many people that will say, "Oh yeah, print's dead, direct mail is dead, now Facebook is dead, everybody's Twitter's dead." Everybody's thinking about what's next, and yet my feeling is, in the movie business, which started really commercially 1898 to 1914 in that little span, when the movies came out, it didn't get rid of live speaking, live events. And then when radio came out, it didn't get rid of movies. And then television came along, it didn't get rid of radio. And then now that the internet's here, it's not going to get rid of television. And print is all in the same way. It's not, everything finds its level. That's and right. You may have to explore new expressions of it, I think. But you've done a perfect example of that, going back to a print analog format with the Kinsmen Journal. And you've just done such a that's the key, doing a great job with it. It's not so much what format or platform you use, it's just do it really well.
Yeah. Well, one of the telling, that it's been resonating with the audience and as it gets into people's hands is we've had dozens of people that have ordered one, and then within a couple of weeks they order 3 or 4 or 5 or 10.
Yeah.
That happens very, very often. And there's just this repeat buyer effect. And it's because I think, again, really nobody's filling this space that we're trying to fill. And we're just, digitally, we're just inundated with so many voices and messages. And so the last thing we wanted to do was just be another one. Or just for the sake of being one. And so we said, okay, how can we stand out? But then, in the analog form, it kind of pulls people away. One of my favorite quotes was one of the guys that said, I read this every weekend during my Sabbath. So what he's telling me is when he breaks away to spend time with God and just disconnect from the world, he wants to just immerse himself in this material. That just blessed me so much because, and it's just amazing. I'll share this story because it's one of my favorite. Is there was a gentleman who received the journal as a gift, and his wife saw it on social media. We reached out to John Tyson. We just said thank you because he's been such an inspiration. So we just sent him a couple copies of the journal, just thanking him, not asking for anything. And he shared it on his stories on Instagram. And so we had, a couple dozen orders come in the next 24 hours where this lady purchased it for her husband. He got it for his birthday and he read a couple essays. And he just sent me all these messages on Instagram about just how it's spoken to him and encouraged him and inspired him. Well, turns out, the guy runs a gutter cleaning company in Portland, Oregon. And when I was setting this out to try to find who's my audience, that's the exact guy that I wanted to reach. It's the guy who's just working hard. He's just living his life. He's doing the things that he wants to do. But how do I find that guy and encourage him? Well, the guy ended up ordering 10 more. And he's like, I'm giving this to all the men in my life. And I was just like, wow, that is just such an affirmation of what we've been trying to do. So we've been taking a very grassroots bootstrap, we don't have a massive mega marketing budget. So we've just our best marketing is just getting it in the hands of people. And then they say, okay, I know so-and-so who wants this. And then they buy it for them and do that. And so it's been really neat. So.
Fantastic. Well, I can guarantee you I'm going to be ordering a box for Christmas gifts. That's for sure. It's just an amazing thing to get, particularly. And I would encourage people that are watching or listening that if you know men who are struggling with their identity or just going through a difficult time, maybe a divorce or struggling with alcohol or just trying to figure out who they are, this is the thing they need. You don't always need a 12-step program. And I think those are fantastic. Sometimes you just need to sit down and read and see what other men are doing and how they're overcoming it and how they're accomplishing things to get your life back on track. It's kind of a reorienting experience to go through this. I was reading some of the essays and it's just, we're so inundated by media today that we kind of forget what real people are like. And I think you've done a great job telling some amazing stories in that is in this that's incredibly encouraging for people like me. So I love what you've done. So how do people get this? Let's go there. How do people get in touch with you? How do they get it? Where do they go? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So the website is kinsmenjournal.com, KINSMEN journal.com. We're most active on Instagram at Kinsmen Journal. You can email me, peter@kinsmenjournal.com. I respond to most all emails that I get on there. You can purchase them on there. I think we have it marked down right now to $59. We had it priced at $79. I think $59 is the right price point. It's a premium price for sure. We understand that, but it's a timeless piece, and we believe that it's going to be well worth every dollar invested on that. We are going to be rolling out actually some of the feedback we've been getting. We're going to be rolling out almost like a leader's kit, if you will, for people that want to buy in bulk. We're going to have kind of like a field guide about how to use the journal with some probing questions for
That's
discussion.
a great idea. Love that.
Yeah. And so we're going to have that along with 12 journals. Our banner, we have these really neat banners that we had made, faith, fatherhood, and work, that's included. And we have this custom box that we had made printed. And so we're going to have all of that together in almost like a kit for $500, which is considerably discounted from, if you were to buy it individually with all the stuff you're going to get. So our intent with that and what we found is that we want people to use this in existing ecosystems, whether it's a men's small group or a breakfast club or a Bible study or an entrepreneurial group or just a dad and a son or a husband or brother, whatever it may be. Like, people are using it in their existing, gatherings. And so it's not a curriculum. Yeah. It's not a how-to 12-step. It's stories. It's reflections. And what happens is when men read about that, it opens up dialogue in their own lives. And that's the intent. And that's why we covered a breadth of topics. I mean, we covered the subject of community and identity and surrender and character and faithfulness. And, there's a gentleman who wrote about his grandfather, and a World War II hero. Another gentleman that wrote about him and his wife struggling with infertility for 14 years, an amazing couple. They both come from huge families. Like, it's an amazing story.
Wow.
But his story is not one of how at the end they're now pregnant and they have 5 kids. No, he's literally in the trenches right now, praying and wrestling through, God, like, how are you going to get me through this? Because sometimes that's the story for some people.
Yeah.
And so then we have, subjects of work and the anointing and the work that we do. And so there's just a lot of really great stuff in there. So,
well, for anybody out there thinking that seems expensive, we have in the advertising business, we have a term called perceived value. And let me tell you, the minute you get this in your hands, this is worth every penny. It's absolutely worth every penny. The quality is just so amazing. And the content inside is really incredible. So I encourage people, we'll put all the contact information in the show notes so people can come and figure out how to order more of them. And you'll be hearing from me soon. So I just think this is a great thing. And thank you so much for being a part of the show. I love reminding people print's not dead. Quality matters. Excellence matters. All those things which are evident in this, you've done to a great degree. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it today.
Oh, absolutely. Phil, I'm so privileged and honored that you'd have me. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm so grateful for Peter being on the program. That's just a great story of someone who had a dream, kept his job, did it on the side. You don't always have to just walk away from your job. It's amazing how much you can do. I've said many times, I wrote my first 2 books coming in from 6 to 8 in the morning to an office at a full-time job, because I knew I was a morning person and I knew those hours I could be most productive, no phones ringing, no people coming in and interrupting. You can juggle both if you're strategic and you really think about the possibilities. And so I just think, I love talking about this stuff. And by the way, if you haven't gotten my book, Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking, I would encourage you to do that. And also, in line with today's discussion, my book, One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do, is something you might consider. You can go to my blog at philcooke.com and check on how to get a copy of that book, One Big Thing. You can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any place books are sold. You can order it from there. It might give you some insight if you're struggling with what my niche is, my niche, you might say. If you're struggling to figure out what is that focus and purpose of my life, One Big Thing, Discovering What You Were Born to Do, is my book that I think will help you the most. So thanks again for watching. Share this with your friends. If you have people that are struggling with their career and deciding what to do, they would probably greatly benefit from something like this. And rate us, share it, and be sure to tune in for the next episode.